One waitress, one arrogant millionaire, and a grand piano. What started as a cruel attempt to humiliate her turned into a moment that silenced the room and shattered egos. You will not believe how she turned the tables with nothing but her talent. It was a warm Friday evening, and the hum of conversations filled the air at LaFontaine, an upscale restaurant tucked into the heart of Raleigh, North Carolina. The clinking of glasses, soft footsteps of servers, and the faint strains of jazz from a corner piano created an ambiance of refined indulgence. Deborah, a 25-year-old waitress with a quiet demeanor and an unmistakable spark in her eyes, moved swiftly between tables, balancing plates and smiles. To most patrons, she was just another face in uniform, but inside she carried dreams bigger than the luxurious dining room around her. Deborah's passion was not serving tables, it was music. Ever since she was a child, the piano had been her refuge, a place where she could express every joy, every sorrow, and every unspoken thought. But dreams do not pay the bills. Working long shifts at LaFontaine was a necessity, a stepping stone toward the music academy she longed to attend. Few knew about her talent except for the restaurant staff, who occasionally caught her stealing moments at the old upright piano in the back room during breaks. That night, as the evening rush began to settle, the door swung open and in walked Leonard Grayson. Instantly recognizable, the wealthy entrepreneur made an entrance like he owned the room, flanked by a few equally polished companions. Leonard exuded an air of superiority. Known for his sharp tongue and penchant for spectacle, his presence made even the most seasoned staff stand straighter. Deborah's colleagues exchanged knowing glances. Leonard was not an easy guest. He was the kind who thrived on pushing people's buttons. For Deborah, though, he was just another table to manage in a long night's work. But this was not going to be just another night. Leonard settled into his usual corner booth, the one with the best view of the entire restaurant. From here he could watch and be watched. His preferred dynamic. His companions, all cut from the same cloth of inherited wealth and learned arrogance, flanked him like an entourage. Deborah approached with her notepad ready, her smile professional but warm. "Good evening, gentlemen. Welcome to LaFontaine. Can I start you with something to drink?" Leonard looked up slowly, his eyes scanning her from head to toe with the kind of assessment that made people feel like objects rather than humans. He leaned back in his chair, a smirk playing on his lips. "Well, well," he said, his voice loud enough to draw attention from nearby tables. "Look what we have here. Tell me, sweetheart, what makes you think you belong in a place like this?" Deborah's smile faltered for just a moment, but she recovered quickly. "I work here, sir. I am your server for this evening." Leonard chuckled, a sound devoid of warmth. "You work here? How charming. And tell me, what are your qualifications for such a prestigious position? Did you graduate from serving school?" His companions snickered, and Deborah felt the familiar burn of humiliation creeping up her neck. Around them, other diners began to take notice. Some looked uncomfortable. Others seemed curious about the unfolding drama. "I am here to do my job, sir," she said, her voice steady despite the storm building inside her. "What can I get you to drink?" Leonard was not finished. He was just getting started. "You know what I find fascinating about people like you? You think you can just walk into places like this and fit right in. But there is a difference between us, darling, a difference that all the uniforms in the world cannot hide." The restaurant had grown quieter now, conversations dying as people strained to hear what was happening at Leonard's table. Deborah stood frozen, her notepad trembling slightly in her hands. Leonard stood up, his voice carrying across the room. "Ladies and gentlemen," he announced as if addressing an audience at a theater, "we have entertainment tonight. This young woman here," he gestured toward Deborah, "claims to work at one of the finest establishments in the city. But I wonder, what other talents might she have?" He turned back to Deborah, his eyes gleaming with malicious intent. "I bet you sing, do you not? All your people are naturally musical, are they not?" Deborah's jaw tightened. "Sir, I am not here to entertain. I am here to serve your table. Now what would you like to drink?" But Leonard was not about to let this go. He had an audience now, and he was going to make the most of it. "Oh, come now. Do not be shy. I insist. In fact, He turned toward the grand piano that sat in the center of the restaurant. "Why do we not see what you can do with that beautiful instrument over there?" The entire restaurant was watching now. Servers had stopped mid-stride, patrons had put down their forks, and even the kitchen staff had emerged to see what was happening. Deborah could feel dozens of eyes on her, some sympathetic, others curious, and a few that seemed to enjoy the spectacle. "I do not play piano, sir," she lied, her voice barely above a whisper. Leonard laughed loudly. "Oh, I think you do. I think you all do. It is in your blood, is it not? Natural rhythm and all that." He looked around the room, playing to his audience. "Come on, everyone, let us see what our server can do." I am sure she has been dying to show off. Some of the diners looked away, uncomfortable with what they were witnessing. Others seemed entertained by the drama. But no one spoke up. No one said a word in Deborah's defense. Leonard pulled out his wallet and placed $100 bill on the table. "Here is what I will do," he said, his voice dripping with condescension. "Play us a song, any song, and this is yours. Think of it as a tip for excellent entertainment." Deborah stared at the money, then at Leonard, then at the sea of faces watching her every move. She felt small, insignificant, like a bug under a microscope. Part of her wanted to run, to disappear into the kitchen and never come back out. Part of her wanted to tell Leonard exactly what she thought of him and his money. But there was another part of her, a part that had been silent for too long, that was tired of being invisible, tired of being underestimated, tired of having her dreams dismissed by people who had never worked a day in their lives. That part of her started to speak. "Actually," she said, her voice growing stronger, "you are right about one thing. I do play piano." The room seemed to hold its breath. Leonard's smirk widened. He thought he had won. But then Deborah continued, "And since you are so interested in my musical abilities, I would be happy to play something for you." She untied her apron and set it down on a nearby chair. The restaurant manager, who had been watching from across the room, started to move toward her, but she held up a hand to stop him. Deborah walked toward the grand piano, her footsteps echoing in the hushed restaurant. She could feel every eye following her, but for the first time all evening she was not afraid. She was angry. And sometimes, anger can be the most powerful fuel of all. She sat down at the piano bench and placed her fingers on the keys. They were cold and smooth beneath her touch, familiar and comforting. She had not played on an instrument this beautiful in years. For a moment, she sat in silence, letting the weight of the moment settle around her. Then she began to play. The first notes that emerged from the piano were soft, tentative. She started with Chopin's Nocturne in E-flat major, a piece that had always been close to her heart, but as she played, something began to change. The tentative notes grew stronger, more confident. Her fingers moved across the keys with a fluidity and grace that spoke of years of practice, of countless hours spent perfecting her craft. The restaurant fell completely silent. Even the kitchen staff stopped their work to listen. The music filled the space like liquid gold, each note pure and perfect, and filled with emotion. Leonard's smirk began to fade. He had expected amateur fumbling, something he could mock and dismiss. Instead, he was witnessing something extraordinary. But Deborah was not finished. As the nocturne came to an end, she transitioned seamlessly into Rachmaninoff's Piano Concerto No. 2, a piece so technically demanding that even professional pianists approached it with caution. Her fingers flew across the keys, executing impossible runs and delicate passages with equal skill. The music soared through the restaurant, passionate and powerful and achingly beautiful. Some of the diners had tears in their eyes. Others sat with their mouths open, unable to believe what they were hearing. Leonard stood frozen, his companions equally stunned. This was not what he had expected. This was not what he had planned. Deborah played for 20 minutes, moving from classical to jazz to blues, demonstrating a range and versatility that would have impressed conservatory professors. She played pieces from memory, pieces she had learned as a child and carried with her through years of struggle and sacrifice. When she finally lifted her fingers from the keys, the restaurant erupted in applause. It was not polite, restrained applause. It was thunderous, overwhelming, the kind of ovation reserved for world-class performances. People stood up, clapping and cheering. Some wiped away tears. A few called out for more. The restaurant manager, who had been prepared to fire Deborah for leaving her station, now looked like he had witnessed a miracle. Deborah stood up from the piano bench and turned to face Leonard. He was still standing where she had left him, but his arrogant smirk was gone. In its place was something she had never seen before, genuine shock and perhaps shame. She walked back to his table, picked up her apron, and tied it around her waist. The applause continued around them, but she spoke directly to Leonard, her voice calm and clear. "You are right about one thing, sir. There is a difference between us. The difference is that I have worked for everything I have. I have earned my place here not through inheritance or luck, but through talent and determination and the willingness to serve others with dignity." She picked up the $100 bill from the table and held it out to him. "But I do not need your money. What I need is your respect, and if you cannot give me that, then perhaps you should find somewhere else to dine." The restaurant fell silent again, waiting to see what Leonard would do. His companions looked at him expectantly, probably assuming he would explode in anger or demand to speak to the manager. But Leonard did something unexpected. He sat down heavily in his chair and put his head in his hands. When he looked up, his eyes were different. The arrogance was still there, but it was tempered by something else. Humility, perhaps, or recognition. "I owe you an apology," he said quietly. "What I did tonight was inexcusable. You are clearly a remarkable musician, and I had no right to treat you the way I did." Deborah studied his face, trying to determine if his words were genuine. She had heard plenty of hollow apologies in her life, usually from people who were sorry they got caught rather than sorry for what they had done. But something in Leonard's expression suggested this might be different. The restaurant was still watching, still waiting to see how this unprecedented drama would resolve itself. Deborah could feel their eyes on her, but for the first time, she did not mind. She had found her voice, literally and figuratively. "I accept your apology," she said finally, "but I hope you will remember this moment the next time you encounter someone you think you can dismiss or humiliate. Everyone has a story, Mr. Grayson. Everyone has worth. And sometimes, the people you least expect can surprise you in the most extraordinary ways." Leonard nodded slowly. "You are right, and for what it is worth, you have a gift that most people can only dream of. Do not let anyone, including me, make you forget that. What happened next would change both of their lives forever." But that change started with a simple moment of human recognition, the acknowledgement that talent and dignity know no boundaries, and that sometimes the most powerful response to cruelty is not anger, but excellence. The applause began again, but this time it was not just for Deborah's musical performance. It was for her courage, her grace under pressure, and her refusal to be diminished by someone else's prejudice. As the evening continued, diners approached Deborah throughout the night. Some asked for her card, others inquired about private lessons, and a few wanted to know if she gave concerts. Word spread quickly through the restaurant and beyond. By the end of the evening, Deborah had received offers to perform at private events, to teach at a local music school, and even to audition for a recording contract. But the most significant change came from Leonard himself. Before leaving that night, he approached Deborah one more time. "I meant what I said about your talent," he told her, "and I would like to make amends for my behavior tonight in a more substantial way. I sit on the board of the North Carolina School of the Arts. If you are interested, I would like to arrange for you to audition for their piano program. Full scholarship, if you are accepted." Deborah stared at him, hardly able to believe what she was hearing. The North Carolina School of the Arts was one of the most prestigious music programs in the country. She had dreamed of attending, but never imagined she could afford it. "Why would you do that?" she asked. "Because talent like yours should not be wasted serving tables," he said simply. "And because I need to do something to make up for being such a complete fool tonight." 6 months later, Deborah walked across the stage at her graduation from the music program, her family cheering in the audience. She had been offered a position as a concert pianist with a major symphony orchestra, But she had also decided to continue teaching, particularly working with privileged children, who, like her, had talent but lacked opportunity. Leonard kept his promise about the scholarship, and more than that, he had become an unlikely advocate for arts education in underserved communities. The night at LaFontaine had shaken something loose in him, forced him to confront the prejudices and assumptions he had carried for years. The restaurant itself had been transformed as well. The piano that had been merely decorative became the centerpiece of regular performances by local musicians. The manager, recognizing the power of what he had witnessed, instituted a program where employees could showcase their talents, leading to discoveries of singers, poets, artists, and musicians among his staff. But perhaps the most important change was in how people saw each other. The diners who had witnessed Deborah's performance that night went home with a new understanding of the depth and complexity that exists in every human being. Many of them found themselves looking more closely at the people who served them, cleaned their offices, and worked in the background of their daily lives. They began to see not just uniforms and job titles, but individuals with dreams, talents, and stories worth knowing. The story of that night at LaFontaine became something of a legend in Raleigh. People talked about it for years, often exaggerating the details, but never forgetting the essential truth at its heart, that dignity and talent can emerge from the most unexpected places, and that the measure of a person has nothing to do with their job title or the color of their skin. For Deborah, the experience taught her that she had the power to change minds and hearts through her art, but also through her courage to stand up for herself when it mattered most. She learned that sometimes the greatest performances happen not on concert stages, but in the moments when we choose to show the world who we really are. And for Leonard, it was a reminder that wealth and status are meaningless if they are built on the diminishment of others. True power, he realized, comes not from putting people down, but from lifting them up. Years later, when people asked Deborah about that night, she would always say the same thing. Music has the power to transform not just the listener, but the performer as well. That night, I did not just play the piano. I played for my dignity, my dreams, and my right to be seen as more than just a uniform. And in doing so, I discovered that sometimes the most important audience you will ever perform for is yourself. But the story did not end there. 5 years after that transformative evening at LaFontaine, Deborah had become one of the most sought-after concert pianists in the Southeast. Her debut album, titled Invisible No More, had reached the top of the classical music charts, and her concerts regularly sold out venues across the country. She never forgot her roots, though. Every month she returned to LaFontaine to perform for diners, always wearing the same black dress she had worn that first night. The restaurant had built a small stage around the grand piano, and these monthly concerts had become legendary in Raleigh. People would make reservations months in advance just to witness what had become known as the Deborah experience. Leonard, now in his late 60s, was a regular attendee at these performances. The arrogant millionaire of 5 years ago had been replaced by a man who had dedicated much of his fortune to arts education and scholarship programs for underprivileged youth. He had never married, never had children of his own, but he liked to think of the hundreds of students he had helped as his legacy. On one particular evening, as Deborah finished her performance to thunderous applause, she noticed a young girl sitting at a corner table with her mother. The girl, who could not have been more than 10 years old, was staring at the piano with the same longing that Deborah remembered feeling at that age. After the applause died down, Deborah made her way over to the girl's table. The mother, a tired-looking woman in a worn dress, looked up nervously as the famous pianist approached. "Hello," Deborah said gently, kneeling down to the girl's eye level. "I noticed you watching during the performance. Do you play piano?" The girl nodded shyly. "A little bit. My teacher says I am good, but we cannot afford lessons anymore since my daddy lost his job." Deborah's heart ached with recognition. She saw herself in this child's eyes, the same hunger for music, the same dreams constrained by circumstance. "What is your name?" Deborah asked. "Maria," the girl whispered. "Well, Maria," Deborah said, "would you like to try playing this piano?" The girl's eyes widened in disbelief, but before she could answer, her mother intervened. "Oh no, we could not possibly. This is much too fancy for us. We should not even be here." but Maria begged me to bring her tonight." Deborah looked at the woman with compassion. She remembered her own mother's struggles, the constant worry about money, the way poverty could make you feel like you did not belong anywhere beautiful. "Please," Deborah said, "it would be my honor." With trembling steps, Maria made her way to the piano. The restaurant had not yet emptied, and as word spread that someone new was going to play, diners began to gather around again. Maria sat on the bench, her feet barely reaching the pedals, and placed her small hands on the keys. What emerged was not technically perfect, but it was pure and heartfelt. She played a simple piece, Fur-Elise, but she played it with such emotion that several people in the audience began to tear up. When she finished, the applause was just as enthusiastic as it had been for Deborah. The girl beamed with joy, and in that moment, Deborah made a decision that would once again change lives. "Maria," she said, "how would you like to come to my studio for piano lessons? Free of charge, of course." The girl's mother began to protest, but Leonard, who had been watching the entire exchange, stepped forward. "And I will make sure she has a piano to practice on at home," he added quietly. From across the restaurant, the manager who had witnessed Deborah's original performance years ago smiled. He had seen this cycle of generosity play out many times since that first magical night. Deborah had personally mentored dozens of young musicians, and Leonard had funded scholarships for hundreds more. The ripple effects of that one evening continued to spread. The staff at LaFontaine had become more attuned to the hidden talents among their colleagues. The diners who frequented the restaurant had become more aware of the full humanity of the people who served them. And the city of Raleigh itself had developed a reputation as a place where talent was nurtured regardless of background or circumstance. Maria would go on to win several youth piano competitions over the following year. At age 16, she would receive a full scholarship to Juilliard, personally recommended by Deborah. But more importantly, she would carry forward the lesson that talent and determination could overcome any obstacle, and that kindness could multiply exponentially when it was freely given. The transformation that began with one act of cruelty and one response of extraordinary grace had created a legacy that would outlast all of them, because that is what happens when we choose to respond to hatred with excellence, to prejudice with dignity, and to dismissal with undeniable proof of our worth. Sometimes the most powerful revolutions begin not with protest or legislation, but with a single person refusing to be diminished, choosing instead to shine so brightly that the darkness around them has no choice but to retreat. And sometimes the very person who tries to break you becomes the one who helps you soar. Never assume you know someone's worth based on what they wear, where they work, or what their resume's. Talent has no dress code, intelligence needs no permission, and brilliance can walk past you wearing a name tag, holding a tray. If you have ever been overlooked, underestimated, or ignored, keep going. The right moment will come, and when it does, do not be afraid to show the world exactly who you are, because sometimes one performance can change everything, and sometimes the people who try to diminish you end up being the very ones who help you rise.